Okay, so the second part of the lecture will be focused on evaluation in HCI and to heuristic evaluation in particular. So heuristic evaluation means experts checking our design according to some design principles. So you have already seen this picture, and the key message here is that evaluation is not something that happens at the end of the design process only. You should have different evaluations in your design process, which is actually an iterative process. So the goal is always to fix issues as soon as possible. So you have seen some guidelines, principles, theories to generate design solutions. Some of these principles, guidelines can also be used to evaluate user interfaces, in particular in expert reviews and heuristic evaluations. Okay, and so we are there with our process. So what do you mean with evaluation in the HCI domain? We mean testing the usability, functionality, and acceptability of an interactive system. And this evaluation is performed according to the design stage. So every design stage has its own evaluation strategies that are more effective than others. We can evaluate according to our initial goals, alongside the different usability dimensions, and using, again, a range of different techniques. And in this course, we will see two of these techniques: heuristic evaluation in the assignment tree and usability testing at the end of the course. Okay? You saw this slide at the beginning of the course, I think. So what is usability? How well users can use the system functionality. And we can specify this according to different dimensions, from usefulness, so does it do something people want, to learnability, is it easy to learn, or every time I open the application I need to learn from scratch how to use it. Memorability, effectiveness, does it allow to reach the goal or not? Efficiency, once learned, is it fast to use? We have seen an example with finding the information about graduating in the Politecnico website. Visibility, is the state of the system visible or not? Errors, can we recover from errors or not? And finally, also satisfaction is part of usability. So is it enjoyable to use or not? So this is the first aspect that we can evaluate under usability. Then there is functionality. So here we are testing if the functionality are compliant with the user needs. The functionality provided by the system should accord with the user requirements, with the user needs, and should enable users to perform their intended tasks. So in a way, it's what you are doing now with the assignment 2. And of course, functionality can be tested in different ways according to the design stage. One can ask, are the appropriate functionality available within the system? Are they clearly reachable by the user? And do they match the user expectations? And of course, functionality evaluation can also include measuring performance. Of course, not in with a paper-based prototype, but maybe with a high-fidelity prototype. We can assess the effectiveness of the system in supporting the task, also measuring, for example, the time on task, so the time the user needs to complete the task. This, for example, will be one of the key metrics in usability testing that you will perform at the end of the course. And then the third aspect that we can evaluate is acceptability. That can be divided between acceptability and acceptance. Acceptability is the perception of the user before using a system. Okay, so I never use this system, but I know it, and I have a degree of acceptability of this kind of systems. And then there is acceptance, that is my perception of the system after I have used it. Okay, so I have used it, and I now have a certain degree of acceptance of the system. So good user interface design can make a product easy to understand and use, and this results in greater user acceptance, of course. And testing acceptability means evaluating also the enjoyment in a way and the emotional response of the user to a system. And this can be measured, for example, with questionnaires and stuff like that. After using the system, I give my perception on different aspects related to this enjoyment and emotional response. So we can measure satisfaction, comfort, and we can also, on the contrary, identify areas of the design that maybe overload the user. So think about a recommender system which shows thousands of suggestions in the home page. This is probably overloading the user. So these are all aspects that can be measured under the acceptability umbrella. As I said before, we have many different evaluation approaches, and we can categorize them in different ways. And the first categorization involves where the evaluation takes place. So we can have evaluation in the lab, or we can have evaluations in the field. Okay? So in lab studies, users are taken out from their normal environment, and they are asked to come in the lab, try your application, your interface, in a controlled test. Okay, so everything is controlled. There is a session of, I would say, 1 hour maximum. And in this session, we can see how the user is using your application. We can measure certain things, and so on. And this kind of tests are typically used in the early stages of design, for example, to compare alternatives, because you don't need a working implementation because you control everything. Okay? Can you think about some situations, use cases for which lab studies are needed or are important? Why should we test in the lab?
Maybe when my technology is too premature and I can't share it with the world.
Okay.
Secret.
Okay. When your technology is not yet ready and you cannot share it with everyone. So again, that's a use case. So in the early stages of design. Other potential use cases. Think, for example, about the aerospace domain. Okay, so before sending astronauts in the space, maybe it's better to test the usability of the interface in the lab, right? Or the medical domain. So you can simulate dangerous environments, you can test your interface before having your interface in production. Instead, can you think about some use cases where lab studies are not the answer? Social studies, yes. Or, for example, for specific use cases like you are developing an app for running, for example. You cannot have your participant running in the lab. So there are situations for which lab studies are not probably appropriate. Okay? So again, to summarize, there are pros and cons, of course, for every evaluation approaches. And for lab approaches, as a pro, you can simulate dangerous environments. It's suitable for specific tasks within a system. So you cannot probably test the whole system. You can test different parts of it. but there are also drawbacks. So you lack the context, okay? You lack the real context. There is an unnatural situation that can lead to biases, right? So because your participant know probably that you are observing him, that you are observing her, and this of course creates bias. So it's not suitable for all the possible tasks. Field studies or in the wild studies instead takes the designer or the evaluator out into the user work environments. So in the natural context of the user to observe the system in action, okay? And there are pros and cons again. So pros are that you have this open nature, you have the real context, so users are in their natural environment, so you can really understand how your system are using, how your users are using your systems, your system. But there are also cons in this case. For sure, you have a low degree of control. So in the lab, you can control everything. You can even test a prototype. You can simulate the prototype. The prototype doesn't need to work for real. In the wild, you need an implementation, something that is working, something that doesn't crash after 5 minutes. Okay, so and you cannot control the contextual situation. So it happens that maybe out of 14 users, for 20 users, your application will crash. So it's something that you need to take into account. The cost is higher because you need a working implementation, and also the duration is typically longer. So for a field study, you typically try your application for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Instead, a lab study lasts 1 hour probably, okay? So this was the first categorization. Then we can also have different categorization in terms of who is going to evaluate the artifact. And in particular, the evaluation may be based on expert evaluation. And within this umbrella of expert evaluation, we can have analytic methods, review methods, model-based methods, and heuristic evaluation, which is the evaluation method we will see in this course. So expert evaluation in general are performed to solve the easy to understand problems. So it's useful to identify any areas that are likely to cause difficulties because they violate known cognitive principles or known design principles. Okay, so we don't need to go in the wild to understand that your gray text over a black background is not readable. Okay, we just need experts. So this kind of evaluation can be used at any stage of the design process. It's relatively cheap because it does not require user involvement. You just need to recruit 3 to 5 experts. Of course, the cons is that it does not assess the actual use of the system from actual users. But we will see this when we will talk about heuristic evaluation. Then, of course, evaluation may involve users. And here we can have experimental methods, observational methods, query methods, formal or semi-formal or informal methods. So, for example, in experimental methods, we test an hypothesis looking at the user using our system. So we get an empirical evidence. For query methods, we have interviews. You already used interviews for need finding. You can, of course, also use interviews for evaluating something. Okay? You conduct an interview with your users after a trial of 2 weeks, for example. And finally, you can also adopt automated evaluation. This is common in software engineering, but it's something that we won't cover in this course. So let's look at the heuristic evaluation in particular, which is an evaluation part of the expert evaluation umbrella. So heuristic evaluation will look for usability problems asking to experts, okay? And again, in the assignment tree, you will also be the expert with respect to the prototype of another group. So expert will critique your design, of course, in a constructive way, okay? Again, we can use this design critique method at different stages of our design process. So we can use it before user testing to save effort and solve the easy to solve problems. We can use heuristic evaluation maybe before redesigning something, for example, to identify the good parts of your interface and the parts that should be redesigned. Or we can use heuristic evaluation to, for example, generate evidence for problems that are known or suspected. Maybe your application is on the Play Store and you are receiving a lot of bad reviews. Let's check if these concerns make sense. Let's conduct an heuristic evaluation to confirm or not this. This is a method that was developed by Jakob Nielsen, a famous HCI researcher that worked with Dan Norman. And it's structured like a design critique. It uses a set of very simple and general heuristics, and we will see in a minute what is an heuristic. It is executed by a small group of experts, 3 to 5. And the goal, again, is to find usability problems in a design. It's also called discount usability because it's really cheap. You just need 3 to 5 experts. And so what is an heuristic? It's a sort of guideline or general principle or rule of thumb that can guide a design decision or be used to critique a design in an interface. So this kind of heuristics can be used again both for generating solutions but also to evaluate existing designs. And this is the basic idea of the evaluation. You define a set of heuristics or principles, but typically you use some well-known heuristics, the ones proposed by Nielsen. You give those heuristics to a group of experts, and each expert will use the heuristics to look for usability problems in the interface. Experts work independently, so typically each expert will find different problems. Then at the end there is this meeting where experts communicate and share their findings, and the goal is to create a shared report. And the violations that are found in the interface, the violations of the heuristics, are used by the design team to fix the problems. So in an heuristic evaluation, you are looking for violations of existing heuristics. Okay? Nielsen proposed 10 heuristic rules, the ones that we are also going to use in the assignment tree, that are good at finding most design problems. And of course, these heuristics are inspired and really connected to the design principles, to the guidelines that you have already seen. So there is a lot of overlap with that principles. In some specific context or application domain, you can also define your own heuristics. So new heuristics can be defined. For example, there are guidelines, heuristics for human-AI interaction. You can use those heuristics if you are looking for problems related to human-AI interaction. So the process is in a way independent from the used heuristics, but we are going to use the Nielsen ones. Okay, let's divide this process into different phases. So first of all, you have this pre-evaluation training. So of course your solution is targets a very specific population. So the expert, the evaluator, need to impersonate a user in that specific population. Okay, so it's common to have this sort of training to make the expert aware of the target population, maybe on the domain of your application. For example, if you are designing an application for doctors, the expert will be an expert of HCI probably, so not a doctor. So you need to train him to, I don't know, names and labels that doctors typically use. So you should give the evaluator information about the domain and the scenario to be evaluated. Then you have the individual evaluation. So each expert independently look for heuristic violations in the design. For each violation, the expert assign a severity rating. There are some violations that are a catastrophe, we will see the scale in a minute, or there are violations that should be assigned low priority, for example, for the design team. So there is this severity rating, and then in the meeting with all the experts try to aggregate the findings and find consensus to create this shared report with violations, and for each violation a severity rating. And then there is the debriefing with the design team. So the experts give the report to the design team and discuss how to solve the problems. How can we evaluate as an expert a design? We need tasks, and that's why we asked you to create this kind of tasks. So we define a set of tasks that the evaluators should analyze, should perform to find usability problems. For each task, the evaluator should step through the design several times, inspecting the elements on the page. And at each step, the evaluator checks the design according to one of the heuristics. Typically, you perform you perform the same task twice. So the first time to get a general feeling of the interaction and the general scope of the application, and then you re-perform the task focusing on specific UI elements. And of course, heuristics are used as a reminder of things to look for. By the way, you can also report problems that are not part of the heuristics if you want. The comments from each evaluator should be recorded or written. There may be an observer taking notes during the evaluation. And the observer can also provide some clarifications, especially if the evaluator is not a domain expert, and that's typically the case. Of course, the observer can provide clarifications, but you should not give you too many information to the expert, otherwise you are biased. You are introducing some bias. The session duration is typically 1 to 2 hours, and again, each evaluator should provide a list of usability problems with a very detailed template. So each violation should refer to a specific heuristic. It should include a severity rating. So it's not a subjective comment, but is a reference to a well-known principle. Where can we find problems as an expert? Well, we can have problems in a single location in the user interface, like a contrast problem, so a problem related to colors. We can also have problems in 2 or more locations that need to be compared. So for example, the designer is using different labels for the same kind of button, like search and find, okay? This creates confusion. We can have problems with the overall structure of the UI. So for example, the designer is not using conventions, patterns common in a specific device. And we can also have something that is missing, okay? So this is a tricky point because you will perform an heuristic evaluation on a low fidelity prototype, which by definition lacks something, but there can also be something that is missing on a low fidelity prototype. For example, there is no back button. I cannot go back. This is important also for low fidelity prototypes. So how many experts do we need to conduct a good heuristic evaluation? And there is a magic number, which is 3 to 5, and there is a demonstration of why this magic number. So Nielsen conducted different experiments to understand how many experts are needed, and in this particular experiment, Nielsen designed this interface with 16 usability problems, so 16 known problems, and then asked 19 evaluators to perform an heuristic evaluation. And from the experiment, we can see that this magic number cannot be 1 because no one identified all the problems. But in general, with 5 evaluators, you are able to find most of the problems, okay? So there are, of course, some evaluators that find more problems than others, but again, with 5, you are able to cover almost all the problems. And this magic number was confirmed by other analyses. Here you can see the ratio between the problems found and the number of evaluators. It's not linear. After 5 evaluators, this ratio tends to level off, okay? And if you consider the cost of recruiting more experts, you can easily see that the cost of recruiting more experts increases, and so the advantages of having more than 5 experts decreases, okay? So you gain very little if you add 5 other experts to your evaluation. So it's better to maybe have 2 different heuristics evaluations at different points of your design stages instead of having 1 with 10 evaluators. Okay, let's talk about severity rating. So as I said before, for each violation, an expert should indicate a severity rating because we need, as a design team, to allocate the most resources to fix the most serious problems. And this severity is a combination of 3 different things. The first attribute is the frequency with which the problem occurs. Okay, is it a rare problem or is it a common problem? Is the design problem in all the pages or is it specific to a single page? So frequency of the problem. Then we have the impact. So the impact of the problem when it occurs. So can the user interact with the system even if there is the problem, or is this interaction blocked? And then we have persistent. Is it one time, or so is the problem happening every time I click the button, or just once, and then in some way I'm able to continue, okay? So considering these 3 different aspects, I should decide on a severity rating for the problem. Of course, first individually, and then by aggregating the consensus with the other experts. And this is the scale proposed by Nielsen, from 0 to 4. So 0 means no problem, and this is not used in the individual phase, but it's used in the debriefing with all the experts. So I can tell that I don't agree that this is a usability problem at all, to communicate to another expert that I disagree with his violation. Then individually I can assign a rating from 1 to 4, where 1 is a cosmetic problem only, so need not to be fixed unless extra time is available on the project. Then we have minor usability problems, so fixing this should be given low priority. Major usability problem, it's important to fix, you should really start from this. And then we have usability catastrophe, which is something that is imperative to fix, otherwise the interface is not working at all. Okay? So again, analyzing these 3 aspects, I decide a severity rating for each violation. Okay, and when I complete my individual ranking, I discuss with the other experts, and typically the experts discuss to find consensus. There are different strategies to do that. You can compute the average, or you can just discuss with your colleagues. And finally, there is the debriefing. So this meeting with the design team to discuss line by line the shared report and help the design team to improve the design. In the assignment 3, by the way, we will stop at the individual phase. Okay, you will do an individual heuristic evaluation, and that's it. So we will not perform the briefing, and we will not create the shared document with other experts. Okay, I think we have already seen this. So let's look at the heuristics that you will also use during the assignment 3. So the heuristics proposed by Nielsen. Again, your goal will be to find violations of these heuristics. If you want, there is a YouTube playlist with lots of videos explaining all the different heuristics. There are also more details in the Nielsen-Norman Group website. I don't know if you have already seen this website, but again, there you can find a lot of information. Of course, you don't need to remember exactly these heuristics. During the heuristic evaluation, you can have maybe the heuristics on a tablet or on a sheet of paper, so you don't need to remember them exactly. And these are the heuristics, from visibility of system status to help and documentation. So we will see them with some examples to help you understand how to discover violations of this. So visibility of system status. The system should always keep users informed about what's going on through appropriate feedback with reasonable time. Okay, so it's about feedback. I'm filling out a form or a multi-step process in general. Can I understand my position within the process? Okay, is there any indication about how long the form is? And when I submit the form, do I receive an appropriate feedback or not? Okay, so it's about feedback. Some examples, some good examples in this case. So no violations in this case. There is this progress bar on the top is indicating that 3 out of 5 images are uploaded. So here the user is aware of the progress and can wait without any hesitation until the process has completed. Also, the user can tap on the progress bar to see more details. So it's always good to have this sort of more details. This is instead let's call it a pattern. We will see the concept of patterns next Monday, but anyway, it's the skeleton loader. It's an animated placeholder for the information that is still loading. But the important thing is that this animation gives you an indication of how the content will look like, right? So you can already understand where the text will be, where the page will be displayed. So it's a good example of a very well designed feedback, because it mimics the structure and the look of the entire view. And also another example of a good feedback is this one about the password strength. So in real time, I understand that my password is good. So it's another good example of feedback. Which feedback can I have in my interface? It's important to give feedback about time. So the execution time for the different tasks. We can give feedback about space. So for example, the occupation of a storage. We should give feedback about action, what is happening, running, stopped in a redundant way. And we can give feedback for the next steps. So again, you have probably seen this in other principles, but the feedback is really important. Of course, we don't want that a situation in which every click means a confirmation pop-up, but we can use different feedback depending on the action that we are performing, right? So for example, when we are tapping a button on the keyboard of our smartphone, there is a feedback, there is an haptic feedback. It's not intrusive, but it's still a feedback, okay? So depending on the action, I can decide which kind of feedback I should provide. And this is a rule of thumb related to feedback about time. So if the execution time is less than 1 second, just show the outcome of the action. If it's around 1 to 2 seconds, you should show feedback that the action is underway, okay, in a generic way maybe. If it's more than 2 or 3 seconds, you should use a progress bar with a percentage, an estimated time, something like that. Okay? Cool. Second heuristic, match between system and the real world. So the system should speak the user language with words, sentences, and concepts that are familiar to the user. So follow real-world conventions, making information appear in a natural and logical order. In other way, try to use familiar metaphors and language. Okay? So if you are designing something for a doctor, again, it's fine to use terms that a doctor typically uses. But if you are developing something for, I don't know, another category of users, using medical terms is not a good idea, right? Okay, here is an example of a possible violation. It's I don't know what it's probably numbers for iOS or something like that. Anyway, if I click on the paintbrush here, what should happen next? What is, in your opinion, the purpose of this icon? Sorry? Fill the background of the cells. Any other ideas? Copy the format of the cell. Okay. Yes, this is what we expect, but in reality, when we click this icon, it opens a formatting menu. So it's not for coloring the cell or for copying the format. It's not displayed here, but it opens a menu, a formatting menu, where we can change the style of the text and something like this. So this can be confusing, okay? Because we expect something for that specific icon, and then when we click it, this is opening an unexpected menu. So in a way, it doesn't match the real world, where the paintbrush means coloring something, for example, okay? So it's always better to follow the real world conventions and to match our expectations. And these instead are good examples. For example, here the icons are taken from the real world and are in a way associated with the label, right? So music, movies, or look at the trash on a macOS computer. We can drag and drop something in the trash. So this is a real world convention in a way. So it's a good example of this heuristic. So to summarize, try to explore familiar metaphor, familiar language. Of course, this depends on the target population, and so considering your target population, you can decide which metaphors to use in your design. Okay, third heuristics, user control and freedom. Users often choose system functionality by mistake. Of course, errors will happen. And we'll need an emergency exit, okay? So to leave the unwanted state without having to go through an extended dialogue. So to summarize, support, undo, and redo, okay? If I'm filling in a form and I mistake something and I click submit, I don't want to restart from scratch, right? I just want to fix the problem and resubmit again. An example of a violation, actually this was an old version of WhatsApp, but what was this convention? To fix something, to fix a message, okay? Because there was no way to edit a message on WhatsApp. Now they have changed this, but this was a clear violation, and hopefully they fixed it. Here instead are some good examples. For example, here. Oh. Okay. There is a clear indication of the cells with different colors. I can accept the formula. I can reject it. So I'm in control, even if I make some errors. Okay. So as a suggestion, always provide a back or equivalent button in your interface. And also allow users to explore alternative paths in the interface if needed. So the importance of the back button, okay? Always also in the low fidelity prototype, you should consider to add the back button or the opportunity to go back in your system. Otherwise, it could be a problem. Okay. Number 4, consistency as standard. Consistency is something that you have already seen in other principles. Users should not have to wonder whether different words, situations, or actions mean the same thing. So follow platform conventions. So if you are using search in one page and find in another page, do they mean the same thing? It could create confusion. So that's an example of a violation of the consistency and standard heuristic. And in general, try to follow the conventions of an existing device, of a target device. So on iPhones, for example, you have a different way to go back with respect to Android. This is something that should be taken into account. Yes, this is more like a joke, but anyway, do you recognize this? It's Google Plus. So they use this +1 to counter the Facebook like, okay? Without much success, because Facebook like already became a standard, and sites like LinkedIn adopted it without contesting in a way. So this operation by Google was unsuccessful because they tried to design a different method, a different thing, but the thing is this was already a standard, and so they didn't follow it, and they was unsuccessful. And this instead is a good example. Here we have 2 or 3 different apps, Microsoft apps. This is an old version, this is probably the new version. But there is consistency, right? So if you learn how to use Word and insert a shape on Word, you are probably able to insert a shape on PowerPoint too, because there is consistency across a family of software. And so that's definitely a good example. And of course, consistency is something that is important for different aspects of your design. So you should use consistent layout for dialogues and forms, like consistency in the position of the navigation elements. You should use consistent meaning for your labels, like OK, cancel, yes, no choices. And in general, you should have consistency in all the terms you use in your interface. Okay, so this is an example of consistency and standards related to dialogues. Why the first one is bad? Yes, because you don't naturally answer cancel to that question, okay? Do you want to run this software? Cancel. No, okay? So it's better to use yes, no, right? It makes more sense. But it's even better to use button that includes the meaning of the action, okay? So instead of yes or no, maybe it's better to use run and don't run. Why? It uses the same word in the text, that's true, but why it is important?
It directly goes with the action. Maybe you say yes, then something comes up if you want to run it or not run it. I guess
No, it's better because exactly, I know which is the action. I cannot misinterpret the question, and so nothing can go wrong. If I click run, it means run, okay? Here instead, yes, no, maybe I misinterpreted the question and I click yes instead of no because I imagine something wrong about the question, okay? So it's even better to use the name of the action within the button. Number 5, error prevention. Even better than a good error message is a careful design which prevents the error, okay, in the first place. And this is really important. So inside a form, if you know that there is a mandatory field and you have a default option, just include it in the field, okay? Let's look at some examples to be more clear. This is an example of a violation related to error prevention, okay? When you write this email, like please see the attached files, but you forget to include the attachment, in this specific client, you can send the email anyway, okay? With an error, because you forgot to include the attachment. There are clients that warns you use the attachment word in the text. Maybe you forgot to include it, okay? This happens, for example, I think in Gmail, or I'm not sure, but in some clients it's happening. So in this case, we are not preventing this error. Here instead are good examples. So this is a mandatory field. so the button is disabled unless I attach something. And also in this case, there are two buttons, one to submit a form, the other one to cancel, so a primary and a secondary action, and they are very different, right? So I can really distinguish which is the main action with respect to the secondary action, and this prevents, for example, clicking the wrong button because maybe I didn't pay attention to the interface. Here I can really distinguish which is the main action so that I can hopefully click the right button. Other good examples. Here is the autocorrection feature from Google. It prevents the errors because I can click on the right word before clicking search. Or in every websites related to flights or travel. So for example, when booking a plane ticket, I cannot pick a return date that is before my departure, of course. Anyway, it's important to prevent potential errors. Number 6, recognition rather than recall. This is very important. So we should try to minimize the memory load of the user by making objects, actions, and options visible. And in particular, the user should not have to remember information from one part of the interface and the other. Okay? Let's look at some examples. Here, for example, we have already seen this before. There is this preview of the font. I can recognize, instead of recalling it, the font directly from the menu. Okay, so it's an example of recognition rather than recall. Or in any, or the autocomplete encoding. You don't need to remember exactly the name of the function. You start with the first letter and then you get some suggestions and you can recognize your function. And this is an example instead of a violation. Of course, in a command line interface, you need to remember exactly the command that you need. Okay, so this is a sort of violation of recognition rather than recall. In modern interfaces to write text, there is the button for that specific interface, for that specific command. So if you remember the icon, you can easily recognize it in the interface without recalling the command. So here are some very generic suggestions, but I think that it's quite clear. So it's important to provide preview, code completion, page preview, order summary, and so on. Number 7, flexibility and efficiency of use. This is mostly about accelerators that are unseen by novice users, but may often speed up the interaction for expert users. Can you provide an example of an accelerator? So it's something that simplifies the interaction for experts.
Like the commands or the shortcuts.
The shortcuts. The shortcuts are an example of accelerators. Like in this menu, if I'm seeing this interface for the first time, I can use the menu and I can read the different entries. If I'm an expert, I can just click command something to do the thing. Also, gestures can be used as an accelerator. This is an example in the iOS or Android keyboard. I don't know. Maybe it's present in both. So instead of tapping each letter individually, I can use this gesture to speed up my writing if I'm an expert of this kind of interaction on my phone. Okay. of course, it's important to include both possibilities. So we can include accelerators, but they are not mandatory. Okay, they are there just for helping experts. Some suggestions: you should provide users with some default options, especially for novice users. But you should also provide them with the possibility of exploring other options. And of course, again, novice and expert users have different needs, so you should really support this sort of proactivity and adaptability to different kind of users. Number 8, aesthetic and minimalist design. So interfaces should not contain information which is irrelevant or rarely needed, because of course every extra unit of interface of information in an interface competes with the relevant information. So we need to really focus on the important information needed to perform the tasks. And this is clearly a violation of this heuristic. I think you all agree with me. There are a lot of information, lot of text, different colors, so it's a mess, basically, and it's not definitely a minimalist design. Instead, this is a good example. So the Google search interface is clean, simple, with a minimalist interface that is focused on the main task of the interface, which is searching something on the web. So when I look to this interface, I immediately know which is the main task of this interface. So we have already seen this, but key information must be above the fold. And we should also use a minimalistic login experience, even if login is not something that we will design in this course. And we should also maybe accept redundant ways of entering information. And again, to summarize, try to put the important information only in the interface. Okay, we are almost finishing this. Number 9, help users recognize and recover from errors. So error will happen. Error messages should be expressed in plain language. Do not use codes only. And the message should indicate not only the problem, but it should also suggest how to recover from the error. Let's look at a typical violation, the classic 404 error page. So it just displays the code. It does not tell the user anything about what went wrong or how they can fix the problem. So this is clearly a violation of this kind of heuristic. Here instead there are two good examples, so no violations here. There is a feedback that is linked to the specific point of the interface where the problem is occurring. And in this case, for example, it's probably still a 404 problem, but here you have more explanation. You have also some indications about how to recover from the error. So I can really understand the problem and how to solve it instead of just seeing a simple code. So suggestions: make errors easy to identify with colors, fonts, appropriate colors and fonts. Make problem clear, explain the cause, the location. Maybe you can again link the feedback to the specific portion of the page and provide a solution if you can. And finally, help and documentation, number 10. So in general, it would be better if the application can be used without any explanation, without any legend, but it may be necessary in some cases to provide help and documentation on how to use a specific feature, for example, of your interface. And this kind of information should be easy to search, focused on the task, and it should list concrete steps to perform a given operation. And here we have some examples. Here we are not saying that every interface should have a tutorial. That's not true. But there are cases in which a tutorial is needed for some specific feature. And so here are some examples of tutorials integrated within an interface, like for example this one. Or we can also exploit other strategies like this Slack chatbot, which is there is also on WhatsApp or on Telegram, which is a chatbot that is dedicated to give you some hints on how to use the application, on the recent updates in the application. So it's integrated in the platform, and it's a good strategy to give some indication on how to use the application to the user. So within a tutorial, provide examples, use videos, images, and in general try to integrate this within your interface. Okay, we have finished. Sorry for this long list of heuristics, but next Monday we will do an exercise, so hopefully you will experience this in an exercise. Anyway, if you have any questions, I will be here for the next couple of minutes. Otherwise, see you on Wednesday for the feedback session. Thank you and have a good night.